Hi, I'm Ben from thePinkLens.com and thank you for watching my very first video in which I'm going to be talking you through the history of LGBT cinema. Each video will take you through a different time period, and this very first one is looking at the period before the decriminalisation of homosexuality. Stonewall was in 1969, but in the UK it was 1967, and the ball had started to be rolled, and particularly came to a head in 1965 with the Wolfenden Report and the Conservative peer Lord Arran, who then went through the Lords and tried to get the law changed, of which he was successful in 1967. However, cinema was slower to come round to it. Until this point, the depiction of LGBT people on screen in mainstream Hollywood was controlled by something called the Hays Code. And the Hays Code was a system of rules that stopped people from putting things on film that were considered to be immoral, and that included homosexuality. However, in order to get round the censors, some people and some filmmakers managed to put coded references to LGBT people on screen. For example, in films like Morocco in 1930, Rebel Without a Cause, and Some Like It Hot. And in films like these, LGBT people are quite prominently on screen, but it's never actually explicitly stated that they're LGBT. Instead, it's just hinted at, and as a result we get characters who LGBT people would understand are one of them, but maybe not everybody else. Meanwhile, some LGBT people were being depicted as villains, as criminals, as psychopaths. In films like Advice and Consent, and Compulsion, and Rebecca, LGBT people were seen as terrible villains who were there to corrupt you and there to destroy your lives. And let's just talk about villainous, murderous lesbians for a second. If you think about the film The Children's Hour from 1962, starring Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn, they play a pair of school teachers who are accused of, shock horror, being lesbians. And when it actually comes out the fact that actually they are lesbians, the two of them are so disgusted and revolted in themselves that they cannot continue with being teachers or just generally living. And on screen, lesbianism, as well as homosexuality in men, was shown as something truly, truly repulsive that people should be ashamed of.
Did she sense it? But you know, it could have been any lie. She was looking for anything to... But why this lie? She found the lie with the ounce of truth. Don't you see? I can't stand to have you touch me. I can't stand to have you look at me.
Elsewhere, LGBT people found themselves the victim, in some cases, of blackmail. Blackmailed by people who had discovered their sexuality and were threatening to expose it to their family and employers. And this started to trickle through. These stories started to appear on screen, particularly in films like Victim in 1961, starring Dirk Bogarde, in which a man, a sympathetic man, a man that the audience can understand and relate to, is being blackmailed for his homosexuality. But even though some depictions of gay people were sympathetic, in general, LGBT people were seen as something horrible, as a pariah. You've only got to watch The Killing of Sister George from 1968 to see that even though they were depicting a lesbian story on screen, she was seen as predatory, as perverted, as somebody who should be avoided and somebody who was dangerous to be around. There's also now the very outdated stereotype of the sissy, the highly effeminate gentleman who appears on screen as a sidekick of some sort, as a supporting character, and is seen as somebody who is, yes, funny, but on the other hand has quite a dark side to their personality. You've only got to watch All About Eve to see a perfect example of the sissy on film. So with all these negative stereotypes and negative tropes that were circulating around in Hollywood, where was the positivity? Where were the positive representations of LGBT people? Well, the answer is not in Hollywood. One thing that certainly wasn't being depicted on screen at this point was a sexualized version of homosexuality. Erotica had been being made ever since the invention of the movie camera, but one person who was making some interesting erotica at this point was Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger had been making his erotic movies since the 1940s. Films like Fireworks and Scorpio Rising feature images that have become iconic within the LGBT community. The leather-clad bikers, the handlebar moustaches, the muscle-bound Adonises that would later come to influence things like Tom of Finland and the idealised version of what masculinity was. And erotica was being made behind closed doors and was being seen by a select few. Meanwhile, in France, a very influential French novelist, Jean Genet, made the one film that he would ever make in his career. Un Chant d'Amour was an erotic film in the same style and the same genre as Kenneth Anger. However, his one was seen. Suddenly, people start to see this, and it starts to trickle out. It goes to the UK, it goes to the USA, and it starts to influence what people are starting to see, and it starts to shape what gay erotica would look like until the present day. France wasn't the only country where being gay wasn't illegal. In 1966, Ingmar Bergman, the legendary Swedish film director, created his masterpiece Persona, which features a relationship between two women. It was lauded worldwide as being a masterpiece and was applauded for its aesthetic value. In Italy, directors like Federico Fellini and Pier Paolo Pasolini were able to create films that featured LGBT characters because of the fact that being gay had been legal in Italy since 1890. And meanwhile, in Japan, films like Funeral Parade of Roses were able to be made because being gay had been legal there since 1880. But while the people and the politicians of the US and the UK were a little bit slow on the uptake in following behind its European and Asian counterparts, the artistic community was leading by example. Andy Warhol in 1965 made My Hustler, a quasi-reality TV style documentary which followed a group of gay men around as they were obsessed with a gay hustler called Paul America, and this was made in 1965. And we see then scenes from Fire Island Pines, scenes that would later become synonymous with the gay community, happening in 1965, evident of the fact that there was a gay community that was alive and well, and that people were able to survive being gay in the United States. You've only got to watch the documentary before Stonewall to see that there was indeed a gay community that existed at the same time that all of this repression was going on. However, when we do look back at this period before the decriminalisation of homosexuality, the stories that we hear are stories of people whose lives were ruined by the fact that they were gay, who were forced into the closet and had to stay hidden. Modern day films that look back on the history of homosexual people, films like The Danish Girl, films like Carol and Maurice, and also Bent, which looks at LGBT people during the Holocaust and sees them ripped away from the liberalism that they experienced during Weimar Germany and then interned in the concentration camps, to see just how difficult life for LGBT people prior to the decriminalisation actually was. However, then in 1969, when Stonewall happened, suddenly everything changed. With homosexuality legal across the Western world, suddenly LGBT people had a voice. And these voices were starting to filter through on screen as early as in 1969, the year of Stonewall. That year, Midnight Cowboy won Best Picture at the Oscars, and it featured a hustler who had sex with men in it. And actually, it was the last film that featured gay issues or gay characters in any way to win Best Picture until Moonlight took home the Best Picture prize in 2017. And that marks the end of this period. 1969 and Stonewall marked a massive turning point for LGBT people and also for LGBT cinema. And the next period that I'll be looking at will be from Stonewall until 1980, the period of liberation before the AIDS crisis. Make sure you tune in next time when I'll be talking about all the massive films from the 1970s that have made a lasting impact on LGBT cinema. And also make sure that you check out www.thepinklens.com, which is full of all the news, reviews and information about LGBT cinema you could possibly ever need. Until next time, folks.